Welcome to Late Night Story. When the world goes silent and shadows stretch longer, some stories awaken, whispered only to those still awake. So put on your headphones, turn down the lights, and let me guide you through the quiet hours. If you're listening alone, you're exactly where you need to be. If everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world, don't forget to subscribe before you drift too far into the dark.
Story 1. The Hymnal of Tomcat Rot. It was a hot July, and I was 8 years old. That was the summer I discovered that if I clench my jaw and tense my temples, I could make a rumbling in my ears. I ran to tell Miss Mills, and she responded, "What'd it sound like?" Then she started banging and clamoring all the pots and pans, trying to match the sound. She hooted and I crowed, and all the pans were piled up on the counters as we went looking for the sound. She was always like that, ready to jump when the occasion caught her. They say she shone like the bright yellow sun, but she didn't. She was the sun, and we lived together in her warmth. Old Uncle Nick was nothing like her. He was old as dirt and all crooked up in knots. They say he was like that cause he was drinking, but I say it's cause he was dreaming. He kept thinking he'd be someplace else one day. So today he'd rest. Today he'd do his work. But tomorrow he'd be somewhere else living big. So he stayed and rotted here till there was not much left of him. And if there was someplace where he could have gone, it didn't want him no more. Not in the wicked state he was. All used up, tar-stained and wrinkled. He hung with the hoodlums, the drunks and swindlers, slinging whatever they got their hands on. He was more honest than the rest of them. But he was okay dipping down low once in a while, because he still believed he was going places. He never did realize low was the only place he went, and it's where he stayed. That night, Miss Mills put me and all the animals to bed. She locked the door on the hen house, closed the gate on the sheep shed, latched the door on the horse stable. Then she opened up the gate to the farm to let the moon in, and she kissed every animal to sleep. That's how I remember it. Anyway, most days I'd spend time with Georgia. She lived a farm over, and we'd meet at the swimming hole. Although nobody swam in the swimming hole, since it was riddled with water moccasins. Everybody knew of a boy who got bit by one and died instantly. Didn't stand a chance. Foamed at the mouth and everything. But maybe that's just a story all boys get told to keep them out of overgrown ponds. It worked, mostly. We played beneath sycamores that leaned crooked over the water, their roots twisting down like fingers into the mud. Georgia hopped across the shallows from rock to rock, making a perfect landing with both feet each time, her toes curling over the edges and just barely touching the blue-green water. "What do you want to be when you're older?" I asked Georgia. She stood upright, balancing on a rock, and put a finger to her chin. "I don't rightly know what I is now. How can I know what I will be? I know what I am." I said hop and rock to rock to keep up. Georgia was all spirit and no mind, but sometimes lightning would strike, and she revealed some revelatory wisdom cooked up in that head of hers. "Who is you? Is it your body, your legs, and your arms?" Nah. If a turtle got no legs and no arms, it's still a turtle. It's when you crack that shell open and see all the slithering bits and pumping parts you know. That's what you are, a mess of things all working together to keep the rest alive. She meant to keep going, elaborating on her turtle thinking toward some grand reveal, but our conversation hadn't gone unnoticed. The dairy boys were creeping through the brush. We called them that on account of their rich folks running all the milk in the county. They said their great-grandpa arrived with just 2 cows 100 years ago. Now they had an endless supply of cattle, so they were always wearing new crepe-soled shoes and pressed stovepipe trousers. We didn't have things like that, but we didn't need them. The oldest of the dairy boys threw a lit cigarette, burned down the butt a short way from our naked feet. The ember at the tip choked out on the wet ground in the sizzle. You boys know it ain't safe here, right? The dairy boys then shot dark looks at one another, smirking. "We ain't scared of snakes," I said. "Oh no, not snakes. Something much worse." This is where Tomcat Rot plays his tune. The other dairy boys started laughing. "He snatches up boys like you. comes out to feed, looking for plump little pink boys. Then he looked at Georgia and raised a dirty fingernail into the air. Likes dark meat, too. Georgia protested. You're making that up. The boy grabbed his chest in mock protest, as if shot through by some invisible bullet, then raised 2 fingers. Scout's honor. Then he grinned, showing off a set of crooked teeth yellowed by sugar babies and nicotine. He'll gobble up your souls. The boy then raised a cupped hand to his ear. They say you can hear him down in the mud, tooting his horn and humming something awful. I don't hear nothing but birds and crickets, I said. Ain't no music. Listen closer, the boy said, glaring at me with his gray-blue eyes. The other dairy boys gathered around behind him at the edge of the water. Tomcat Rot was a rag-and-bone man, he continued. Selling scraps he stole off farms, peddling what he could to make a few pennies to spend on Jack Daniels. And you could hear him coming a mile away, since he'd always be playing that trumpet of his. Jazz tunes, mostly. Then he found a tune so dark, so unspeakable, that he tore a hole right to the world, and that let something evil in. So what happened to him? Asked Georgia. The boy scoffed, as if we should have already known. He went crazy. That tune scrambled his brains. Nobody knows if it was a vibrating of that note or a frequency he tapped into like some station on a radio dialed directly to hell. But something was listening, and it came for him, and it got him. The boy pulled another cigarette from a soft pack in his pocket and perched it between his lips, speaking out of the side of his mouth. The town got so scared of him, they threw him in the swamp. But he didn't die. He's still down here somewhere, playing that tune. I stiffened, standing as tall as I could on my rock. I ain't yellow, and I ain't afraid of no jazz man. Sounds can't hurt you, I said. This one can, said the dairy boy. The boy lit a match on the sole of his shoe and lit the cigarette. He took one last big drag and then led the boys off, returning to their farm, leaving a cloud of smoke behind. They laughed as they went. You believe all that? Asked Georgia. I looked back to the smoke, now almost completely faded into the hot blue air. Not for a second. The next day, I saw a man standing still as a fence post in the yard, head tilted back like he was listening to something he couldn't quite hear. His lips were moving, but there was no sound. A hand clamped down on my shoulder, and I jumped, though I'm not proud of it. I ain't yellow. It was old Uncle Nick, and he introduced a new farmhand, said his name quick and low. So I never caught it proper, but the man nodded at me like we'd already met. He was tall and thin, his arms hanging too long, and he carried himself like he was just waiting to set his load down. He wore no hat, though the sun was beating, and his hair was dark, slicked down against his head. Miss Mills hasn't been feeling too well, so he'll be helping out on the farm, working fences, feeding stock. Uncle Nick said, though I noticed he wouldn't look the farmhand in the eye, when you're older, this will be your work. The man gave me a grin that wasn't quite a smile, and when he opened his mouth to speak, no words came, just a low hum, rising and falling like it was caught between his teeth. It weren't no hymn tune, and it weren't a whistle. It was something twisted up, wrong in the middle, but still somehow tapping along in time with my heartbeat. Where's Miss Mills? I asked in a raised voice, so he could hear me with his good ear. Restin', said old Uncle Nick in his terse, grumbly matter-of-fact way. I went inside the farmhouse and followed those narrow halls to her bedroom, and found Miss Mills in bed, her face sweat-slick and pale. The shutters were drawn, but a shaft of sunlight slipped through, illuminating a quilt lying across her lap. The room smelled of camphor and boiled greens, but under it I caught something else, sharp and sour like pennies left too long in the sun. A pitcher of water sat by the bed, sweating onto the nightstand, and a little bottle of tonic stood beside it. The cork pulled halfway. She smiled when she saw me, weak but warm, and patted the quilt so I'd sit close. I climbed up and took her hand. It was warm as a stove, though she was shivering under the covers. Her lips were moving, and after a moment I realized she was humming, soft, broken notes that rose and fell in the same crooked way as the farmhand's tune. It made the little hairs on my arms stand straight. She caught herself and pressed a hand to her mouth. Don't you ever follow that sound, she whispered, her voice shaking. It ain't meant for us. It'll take hold of you if you let it. Promise me you'll shut your ears tight to it. I didn't know what to say, so I nodded. She smoothed my hair back, the way she did when I was small and fevered. This world's loud enough already, she said, with all its wars and trains screaming across the country. We don't need no more noise to lead us astray. Her eyes closed for a moment, and I thought she might drift away right there. I asked if she needed anything, water, a cool cloth, a prayer, but she only shook her head. Just sit with me a spell, she said. You're company enough. So I sat there and listened to her breathe, ragged and thin, the ticking of the mantel clock filling the space between. Outside I could hear old Uncle Nick cursing at the fence posts and the farmhand's low hum carrying across the yard. Miss Mills held my hand tighter, like she was afraid I might slip away into that sound as she let go. I sat with her till her eyes closed and her hand, liver-spotted and worn, went slack in mine. I didn't cry, but concern for her made my stomach sink like a peach pit stuck in my gut. The room had gone dim, the last of the light slipping off the quilt, and the house felt hollow, cold without her voice filling it up. I slipped out quiet, carrying her warning with me, and felt a sadness that the moon would rise in the night sky without her doing. That night I heard that same tune, or something similar. I woke to the window cracked open, the night air creeping thick through the curtain. From the field came a faint trumpet, soft as a sigh at first, then stretching into something long and slow. The notes bent sideways, slippery and hungry, like they were dragging themselves through mud to reach me. I pressed my hands against my ears, but the sound seeped right through, and I began tearing at my temples. I clenched my jaw and started that rumbling in my ears to drown out the sound. It came fierce, so strong it made my teeth ache. I shut my window and went to bed, jaw so tight it was liable to crack, and I stayed that way till my eyes became too heavy to keep open. Come morning, my jaw ached fit to split. I worked it slow, rubbed at the hinges, and it popped like corn. Miss Mills slept with her mouth a little open, the quilt pulled up to her chin. I set a glass of water where she could reach and stood quiet a long time, watching the dust swim in the slanted light. Out in the yard, the farmhand was already at it, walking the fence line with a hammer and a pocket of nails. He didn't whistle or sing. He kept that same low hum, like he had a beehive tucked in his cheek. The chickens scattered when he passed, and the sheep all crowded to the far corner with their heads together, like they were telling secrets they didn't want him to hear. Old Uncle Nick pretended not to notice, and tended to his own chores, mostly ignoring the farmhand. He didn't like talking much anyway. Since his hearing started going, he didn't like talking much to anyone. Said he was standing too close to a mortar in the Spanish War. Towards noon the heat covered us like a wool blanket, and the road out front gave off that kind of liquid shimmer you can see if you look just past it. I was sweeping the porch steps when I saw a figure coming up the lane. At first I thought it was a stranger on account of her hat being mashed flat and her dress gone limp from sweat, but I knew who she was. She carried a little valise banged up on the corners, and she held it in both hands like it might float away if she let go. Her stockings had fallen in wrinkles at her ankles, and there was a run up the back of one. The powder on her face had turned to chalk in the heat, and her lips were too red, like she'd painted them on crooked and forgot to fix it. When she reached the gate, she stopped and put her palm to the post, breathing hard. "Mama," I said, but it came out weak. I took a step forward, but then paused. I didn't know if she wanted me near or not. Maybe she was a dream, or some ghost from my memory come up like bubbling bile. She didn't look at me. Her eyes slid past like I was a milestone on the road. She fixed herself on the house instead, like a dog that smells something cooking. Old Uncle Nick came over and ushered me into the house, his shoulders rounded and his hat in his hand. "You get my letter?" he asked Mama. He said it like a man who already knew the answer, and I understood all at once there had been a letter, his big bent writing, a stamp licked and pressed. It must have told her Miss Mills was sick and said she ought to come. It must have said more, because he wouldn't meet my eye. Her hands held firmly to her traveling case, delicate fingers tensing. "A letter," she said, as if she was trying a word on her tongue for the first time. "I must have." Then she frowned and rubbed the side of her head. "Miss Mills is laying down," I said, finding my voice again. "She's real tired, but she'll be glad you came." Mama's eyes shifted to me, then slid away. She wasn't mad. She wasn't anything I could name. Fuzzy, like someone had breath heavy on a glass between us. She opened her mouth and shut it. Then she took a step and set her little valise down. "Nick," she said. Her voice had a crack in it. "Have you got any money?" He laughed once without smiling. "For what?" She flinched at the laugh like it was a small slap. "Just a little," she said. "To get me to Jackson or Memphis. I can get work in a hotel. I can..." She looked past him to the porch, then to the yard, then to the trees. "It's hot," she said. "It's so hot." "You come a skin for money," old Uncle Nick said soft, and it was worse than if he'd shouted. "You don't come a skin after the boy." She touched the valise with her shoe and didn't look at me. "Boy." I said Miss Mills was sick. He cut in sharp now. I said, "You ought to come." And I said, he stopped and shoved his hat back on his head. I said, "Maybe you could take the boy," he finished, and his eyes flicked toward me in a way. "I ain't saying that now." She blinked. "I can take him," she said. But there wasn't any meat on the words. They hung there and then fell dead. "You can barely take care of yourself," he said. "You come a skin for money and don't even recognize your own son. You ain't taking him. Not today. Not any day you come looking like this." Her mouth trembled, and for a heartbeat something like anger or shame or just plain pain showed through the powder. Then it passed. "Nick," she said again, like his name might turn into a key if she said it right. "Just a little," she whispered. "I'll pay you back." She said like a child says it. Big promise, empty pockets. "No," he said. "I ain't feeding. Whatever hole you've been pouring yourself into. Ain't selling him down the river for a handful of nickels neither." His voice dropped low, full of gravel. "And don't you come calling for that boy unless you mean it true." She stared at the dirty floorboards. Somewhere out in the field, the farmhand tapped a fence staple down, and the hammer rang a dull note. The sound traveled along the wire and into the bones of the posts, and then into me, or that's how it felt. My jaw started to tighten without me telling it to, like it knew what was coming. "Whole damn town's gone mad," old Uncle Nick said. "Cows going dry, dogs howling at noon, men hearing things that ain't there. Music in the dirt. You hear me? Music in the dirt." He took a step toward Mama. "You take whatever madness you brought up this lane and carry it back out with you. Miss Mills don't need none, and the boy don't neither." She reached for him then, quick and foolish, both hands out like she might catch something falling. "Please," she said. "Please, Nick." He shook his head and stepped back. "No," he said again. "Pick up your case and go." For a second, I thought she would look at me. I leaned forward a hair without meaning to. I want to call to her again, maybe jog her memory, say something that might click in her muddled mind, and give her something that might catch and hold. But something inside me told me to wait, that she might discover it for herself, that she missed me and that she wanted me. She didn't. Her eyes slid over me to the front door. She bent slow, picked up the valise, and held it to her chest. When she turned, I heard it, not loud, not even clear. Just a few notes slipped between her teeth, like they were trying to escape. It was the same crooked little tune the farmhand kept in his mouth, the same bent-up thing that made my head ache. She hummed it without knowing it. "Mama," I said, because I couldn't help it. She stopped, but she didn't answer. The humming went on for 2 more notes, then choked off like someone pinched the sound shut. She stood very still. I could see where the sweat had run down her neck and left clean tracks to the powder on her skin. Old Uncle Nick lifted his hand halfway and let it fall. "Go on," he said, tired. "Ain't nothing for you here today." She nodded once to no one and walked out the gate and down the lane, the little case swinging a little with each step. After she turned the bend, I could still hear the ghost of that tune, or I thought I could, braided into the cicadas and hum of the fence wire in the distant lowing of the cows. It made my jaw clench so hard my ears filled with that familiar thunder, my own private rumble trying to crowd it out. I stood where I was and didn't move. The sun climbed higher. The shade on the porch shrank away. Finally, old Uncle Nick adjusted his hat and spat into the dust. "Ain't fit," he said to the yard. "Ain't fit at all." He walked off without looking at me. I went inside and set my hand on the doorframe where Mama's shoulder had brushed as she passed. It was just wood. It didn't remember. The house had gone quiet again, but not the good kind. The kind that presses on your head and makes you think you hear your name called from another room. I carried a basin and a cloth to Miss Mills and wrung the rag out until it was cool and damp. I wiped her face and the soft spot at her throat where the skin was thin as paper. She stirred and smiled with her eyes still closed. "Sweet boy," she said, "you sit right there." So I did. After a time, I heard the farmhand come up to the back step for water. He was careful on the boards, the way a man is when you don't want to make a sound. The dipper knocked against the bucket, and he drank 2 tinfuls with that slow hum moving through him, like a river deep underground you can't see. I thought about Mama's tune, the way it had slipped out her like it belonged to her bones now. I thought about the dairy boy's story, and the way his teeth looked when he smiled. I thought about the night music, the rhythm that came crawling under my window from the swamp. When the day finally dragged its belly into evening and the light turned amber, I went to the back step and sat with my knees pulled up, waiting for the first stars. The air had that stillness it gets just before dark, when even the insects take a break. Somewhere a train let out a far-off cry, and the sound echoed over the fields. I wondered if Mama was on it, sitting by a window with her case on her lap, humming to herself without knowing, riding deeper into whatever place it was had a hold of her. I didn't want to sleep. I knew what waited there, the slow horn, and the sliding notes, and the drag of them in my head like feet through muck. I set my jaw and fell for the rumble until it came, my own sound against the other one. I held to it tight, the way you hold to a fence in high water. Inside, Miss Mills turned over and sighed. Old Uncle Nick struck a match somewhere and cursed when it burned his fingers. The first star showed itself, then another. Then the moon lifted up slow over the far trees, all white and watchful, and for a little while the world looked silvered and calm, like it might be all right. But under that shine the fence wires still sang, and the tune in the dirt kept on, and my jaw ached, and I knew the night would come for me all the same. The next day they laid Miss Mills out in the small white church, with a big bell down by the bend where the road climbs a little and the red clay creeps to the surface. On account of the flu, funerals had to be done quick, as bodies were required to be in the dirt the same day. The clapboards of the little church were fresh painted that spring, but the sun had already bleached the south side, chipping and curling away, showing the blonde wood beneath. I could hear voices within, a gentle murmur of the townsfolk who had come to see Miss Mills off to heaven. They set Miss Mills at the front in a pine box, plain and clean. Somebody had dressed her in her Sunday best and folded her hands over a little Bible whose corners were worn soft as cloth. She looked smaller than she ever had, like the heat had cooked her down a size. The quilt lay across the foot of the box like a field of faded flowers, her doing every stitch. Old Uncle Nick took off his hat and twisted the brim the way a man does when he don't trust his own hands. He steered me to a pew halfway back, where the boards were smoothed by 100 summers of backsides and the varnish had gone sticky. My shirt clung to me. The old women cooled themselves with little cardboard fans on wooden sticks. The fans clicked against their rings and bracelets, 100 small wings trying to keep off the heat and not doing much. Georgia found me there. She slid in at the end of the pew with her dress wrinkled where somebody had ironed it too fast and too hot. Her hair was braided tight, but a curl had sprung loose and stuck to her cheek. She didn't say nothing at first. She just tucked herself in close and set her hand palm down on the pew, so it touched mine. That was enough to make the ache step back a half-inch. The preacher stood and addressed the congregation. He did the talking you're supposed to do, dust and bone, and the Lord giveth and taketh. His voice wandering the rafters and slipping out the open windows to where the cicadas hollered. The sweat ran down his neck and into his collar, and he pretended it didn't bother him. A little band had gathered near the front under the windows, just a pump organ wheezing like an old hound, a guitar with a hairline crack in the top, and a horn, small and dull with the polish it worn, cradled by a man from over past the tracks. They gave us Shall We Gather at the River, and softly and tenderly, and folks sang when they could find a note to stand on. Then the horn man did something strange. It weren't nothing rude, just a little turn stepping down from a note that should have gone straight, a slide. It ran under the hymn like a creek you didn't see till your foot was already in it. The guitar followed, but just barely. The organ found a lower place to sit. The shape of the song got loose at the edges, and then it wasn't a hymn no more. It was jazz. It was that tune. At first it was only a feeling, like catching the scent of something familiar and wrong on a breeze. Then I heard it playing. The same bent-up piece the farmhand kept under his breath. The same slipping thread I'd heard outside my window. The same two notes my mama had let loose without knowing. It climbed up and down, not far, just enough to make my jaw go hard. The paper fan slowed. A woman's hand stopped in mid-flap and hung there like it had forgot what it was for. People got quiet. The preacher's mouth was still moving, but no sound came out. The musician's eyes went soft and far off like they was watching a faraway thundercloud rolling in. Men froze in place, fixed on a sound. Old lady's mouth drooped open a little. The tune wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. It came like steam out of a kettle. It slid under my shirt and onto my skin and into my teeth, and my rumbling rose up against it. I clenched till the hinges ached. I felt the pew under me shift like a bobbing boat and then settle. Georgia leaned into me, and I felt her breath go slow and even, like she was falling asleep sitting up. Old Uncle Nick stood. He didn't stand quick. He stood like a man who knew the weight of his own bones and the price of moving them. His face was dark, angry. Enough, he said. It was hardly more than a word. Folks older than him flinched like he'd shouted. The musicians didn't stop. Old Uncle Nick reached out and snatched away that horn, tearing it from the man's grasp. The last note slid off into nothing, terminating into silence. He bent close so only the men up front could hear, and he said something I couldn't catch, but I saw the shape of his mouth and knew there was a curse in it, old and mean. The guitar player loosened his fingers and blinked like a man waking up. The old women's fan started again like they hadn't even known they'd stopped. The preacher cleared his throat and found his voice again and said, "Amen." Georgia took a breath like she'd been underwater and came back to herself. She looked at me and frowned small, then smoothed her dress where it had wrinkled. "I'm right here," she said, though I hadn't asked her to be. For a minute the church was only a church again, heat and wood and sweat and good shoes pinching toes. Then the whispering started. It ran down the pews and up the walls and out the windows, and a woman in a hat with violets on it touched my shoulder. "Child," she said, leaning close. I knew her, Mrs. Dent, from the store where red licorice sits in jars. "Have you seen the Turner boys?" "The dairy children. They didn't come home last night." She looked out over our heads, as if she might find them standing in the foyer. Their mamas near tore the wallpaper off. She's a skin everywhere. "No, ma'am," I said, and it wasn't a lie, but it felt like one in my mouth. I saw the cigarette smoke again drifting away over the water, and the way the oldest had smiled with his crooked yellow teeth. My jaw found a rumble, without me asking. Mrs. Dent nodded like I told her something useful and fluttered away, already asking the next pew down. Other women took it up. "Have you seen? Did you hear?" And the church filled with the same question turned different ways. Old Uncle Nick came back and sat with a weight that shook the seat. He kept his hands flat on his knees, like it was the only way to keep them from doing damage. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at the box. He looked at the floorboards like something might come up through them if he let his eyes leave them for a second. The preacher tried to start in the sweet by and by, and made it to the first verse before his voice gave out. We sang the rest soft and thin, but honest, and when it was over folks filed past to say goodbye. I was swept up in a line of people headed towards a casket. But when I got to the box, I didn't know what to do. Georgia tugged my sleeve. "You okay?" she asked, not as a habit, but like she cared for the answer. "No," I said, because I didn't know how to pretend, and it seemed the wrong day to learn. Me and old Uncle Nick stayed till the last amen, and the last shovel of dirt, and the last hand shook. Then we walked home slowly, him holding his hat in his hands, and the path we took felt different than the one we'd come by, like the earth had tipped a degree or two in the heat and didn't plan to tilt back. I couldn't sleep that night, and that was good, because I wasn't alone. The curtain breathed in and out like somebody was standing there, and when I slid up on my elbows, I saw faces, small, pale circles floating in the dark. It was the Dairy Boys. Their stares looked like the eyes on those china dolls in Mrs. Dent's window, wide open and seeing nothing. Their mouths were moving. I couldn't hear much, but I knew what it was. That same crooked little tune slipping between teeth. "Come on," one of them whispered, but it didn't sound like a boy. It sounded older, darker. I should have stayed put. Miss Mills had told me not to follow the sound. I slid my knees under me and my bare feet hit the floor. Then I stepped closer. "What do you want?" I asked. "Come outside. We have something to show you," said the oldest Dairy Boy. A dark shape unfolded from the side of the house. A long arm came across the sill and grabbed hold of my shirt, pulling me straight out the window. "Shoo," said the farmhand, and he hauled me up and out like I didn't weigh more than a sack of feed. The boys took my wrists, their fingers hot and wet, and together they hurried me off the porch and down the path, bare feet slapping the dust. The moon sat big and white over the trees. The fence wires sang one long, low note as we went by, and the sheep bunched up among each other shivering. I tried to dig my heels in, but the farmhand had me by the back of the neck now, steering me easy as a calf. "Hush," he said again, and there was a hum under the word that made my teeth hurt. I set my jaw and found my rumble and held to it. It pushed back at the sound and bought me a little space in my head where I could hold on to my own mind. They took me to the small white church. The doors were thrown open and lamplight leaned out over the steps. The bell rope hung by the choir rail, frayed soft from 100 summers pulling, and the whole place felt like a bowl cupped to the mouth of night, waiting to be poured full. They marched me down the aisle between the pews with my toes dragging. Folks were in there, men and women and a mess of children, sitting straight and still with their hands flat on their knees, eyes soft and far away. Even Georgia sat motionless just a few rows down. Nobody said a word. There was a man at the altar, but it was no priest. At first, I thought it was just a man coming dirty from the swamp. His suit hung off his bones like a scarecrow. Reeds clung to the cuffs, and one cattail stuck up from near his shoulder, shedding brown fuzz that floated down around him. He was larger under that suit. I was certain, bits of him spilling out and creeping like tentacles from beneath him. It was tomcat rot, real as life. Then he moved, and the coat hem lifted, and bits of him unrolled from underneath and went sliding along the aisle. The long, grasping bits of him were slimy, slick, and black-green. They split and split again into long, ropey arms that went between the pews and around the legs. The farmhand put his palm on my head and pressed me down onto the front pew. The man at the altar turned to me. His eyes were like two holes burned through paper. He smiled, and the smile had too many bright pieces in it, and some of those pieces looked like teeth, and some of them looked like keys snapped out of a trumpet. He lifted the horn he carried, small and dull where the polish had worn, and he breathed out through. A sound came that made my stomach turn. It weren't loud. It didn't have to be. It slipped along the walls and down the pews and into people's mouths and sat there humming their throats for them. It found my ears and went stalking inside like it had every right to be there. I clenched my jaw till the hinges cried and set my rumble to meet it. The man's eyes narrowed. The tentacles that had slid between the pews twitched and then tightened around the benches as if he'd taken hold of the whole room. The Dairy Boy nearest me swayed and put his hand on my shoulder like he was maybe going to be kind, but then his fingers dug into my skin. "You don't take to my tune," said Tom Catrot, and the voice came out the horn more than the mouth. "How come it won't take?" The sound under the words tried to climb into me, but it couldn't get purchase. He looked down at me with a sort of hurt. "You give me your note, child," he said. "You give it to me and I'll make everything easy." I couldn't answer. The rumble filled my head and pushed against the other sound. "Hold him," said Tom Catrot, and the farmhand leaned into me with his whole weight and pinned my shoulders to the pew. His hum came through his bones and into mine. He smelled like sweat and wet campfire. Then a loud crack cut through the air. The farmhand jerked backwards, his hands flying off me. He took one step back for no reason at all, and then sat down hard on the aisle. A dark red stain spread across his shirt. His hum went out like a snuff candle. He looked surprised at nothing in particular. Another shot from a rifle came after, rolling through the church like a door slamming. Old Uncle Nick stood in the back, bracing the doorway with the long gun on his shoulder. The muzzle smoked a little. His hat was off. His face looked flat, but deadly serious. He chambered another round with emotion. My mind understood, even if my eyes hadn't seen it done but once or twice. "Boy," he said, not loud, rumble. He fired again before the word finished, and the bullet found Tomcat right at the altar just below the collarbone. Something came out that wasn't blood. It was blacker than deep water. The tentacles flailed and slapped the pews and knocked the hymn book up into the air. The people, still under a spell, remained motionless. The horn screamed. That's the closest I can say it. It wasn't a horn playing a note. It was a horn itself letting out a noise it couldn't stand keeping in. Tomcat Rot moaned in pain. The people in the pews began moaning in unison, matching the creature. Old Uncle Nick shot again. The creature staggered back against the altar rail. I tore myself from the grasp of the dairy boy. I didn't think about it. My legs carried me past the front pew and across to the choir rail where the bell rope hung down. I yanked, pulling it down with all my strength. There was a mighty clang. The rope lifted me up, and I shifted my weight to force it down again. Another loud clang. It chimed again, the big iron bell slamming against its own heart. Tomcat Rot went up on his toes like he was standing in a river come sudden and cold. The tentacles shrank, and then sprang, and then shrank again, like they couldn't decide which way a body ought to be. He raised a horn to his mouth, and old Uncle Nick shot him again. The bullet tearing the coat where a belly should be, and showing only a terrible sort of writhing parts beneath. The horn screamed again, and the bell answered, and the two sounds made a fight between them that shook dust out of the rafters. I hauled the rope again till my hands burned. The bell struck wrong on purpose. Off the beat. Off anything that could be called a beat. It was a big ugly sound without a place to sit, and it ran to the church and out the windows and into the trees, and scared the birds into a flutter, and came back to us as a shiver. The sound of the bells seemed to wake up the people from their stupor. Every time Tomcat Rot tried to hum his tune, infect their minds, the bell answered. The children's faces changed. Their mouths stopped moving. Somebody cried out like they'd had a tooth pulled with no warning and no whiskey. Even Georgia seemed to wake for a moment, and she looked at me with tear-filled, pleading eyes. I let the rope carry me upwards again and brought it back down with another clang. Tomcat Rot's tune invaded again, and I did my best to shut it out, but this time it came so powerful, so fierce and hungry. I couldn't resist it. "You make that rumble," old Uncle Nick shouted, and I felt my jaw pull itself tighter to make room for more thunder. He took 3 steps up the aisle, calm as a cavalcade, working the lever and firing, working the lever and firing, the brass popping out and tink-tinking across the boards. Pieces of reed and coat, and something that looked like mud, jumped and spurted with each hit. Tomcat Rot sank back against the altar, tentacles writhing in pain. He dropped to one knee, then another. His fingers, if they were that, scrabbled on the floor and found the horn and hugged it like kin. The creature lifted it and put it to his lips, looking to take back control. Old Uncle Nick walked right up to him. He stood over him with his boots planted where men had knelt to pray, and set the barrel down gentle in the valley just above the bridge of the thing's nose. The horn lifted an inch higher. The bell gave one more wrong strike, ugly and perfect. "I never did like jazz," old Uncle Nick said, and he sent the bullet straight down. The sound that came out of the creature weren't made from a throat. It weren't made from any part of any body I know. It was a torn thing screaming, and somewhere under was a whole lot of other sounds piled up. Train whistles, saw teeth, bees, frogs, a protest gone to riot. The windows rattled. My rumble broke off all by itself and left me with my mouth open and my hand still on the rope, and nothing in my head but the ringing of the bell and the shot. Then it was quiet. Not church quiet, not night quiet. A quiet like when a storm passes, and you can hear the world put itself back in order. The tentacles sloughed to nothing. The coat fell flat like a wet rag. The horn rolled once and hit the rail and stopped. A little bent piece of brass came loose and rolled to my feet, lying there shining like a gold tooth. A baby started crying in the back. Somebody screamed, and then covered their mouth. The dairy boys leaned on each other and blinked slow like they'd just surfaced from a deep pool. One of the old women crossed herself 3 times and then fanned so fast the sticks blurred. I let go of the rope, and my arms went limp from the strain. My hands were burned and the skin ready to blister. I stumbled down from the rail and went to where old Uncle Nick stood, smoke curling lazy out the rifle barrel. He was breathing hard through his nose. He looked down at the heap at his feet, like it might get up and ask to be forgiven. He put his free hand on the back of my head and held it there, so I knew where I belonged. Then he dipped low on one knee and hugged me. "You did good," he said into my hair. He patted my back. "You keep that rumble handy, you hear?" "Yes, sir," I said. Old Uncle Nick looked around like he was checking his work. Then he set the rifles but on the floor and leaned an elbow on the barrel and let out a breath that had been waiting in him a long time. "Reckon I'm glad my hearing's half gone," he said, and gave me a grin that wasn't much, but was enough. Old Uncle Nick killed that thing that night. We all saw it. But I know the thing's still down there, somewhere in the swamp whispering its rot, sending out that jazz, singing songs that drive men mad, touching their souls and corrupting them from the inside out. I know it because I still hear it. And every time I get a rumbling in my ears, Story 2. I use voice to text, and last night it picked up something peculiar. I was cooking dinner, and didn't feel like washing my hands 10,000 times to pick up the phone. I've become too lazy for most tasks, but I have technology to thank for that. I was alone in the house. For context, I live in a small cabin surrounded by some woods. The next house is a 10-minute walk from here, so I'm not so isolated. Still, at night it gets pretty quiet. I'm saying this in order for you to understand that there were no other sounds outside for phone to pick up. The whole house was silent, apart from my voice and the sounds I made while cooking. I was texting my friend about some trip to the mountains. He'd asked me if I was going to bring my tent, to which I replied, "Yeah, I am." He texted back a minute later, "I didn't ask you where you were, though." I blinked a few times, reading the text from the lit-up screen. What did he mean? I checked my text, which said, "Yeah, I am here." I hadn't dictated the last word. Of course, I didn't initially think something weird was going on. I dictated back. I meant I was bringing the tent. I don't know why it picked up here. I'm using voice to text. Sorry. I checked to see if the phone wrote the message correctly, and it had. 10 minutes later, I told Brian, my friend, that I didn't want to bring my shotgun, but I would if I had to. He texted back, "What?" I frowned and left my pan on the stove to check what I'd written before. "I don't want to bring my shotgun, but she's here." Was that some type of autocorrect? Some function to fill in sentences? AI? I don't know what's up with my phone. Sorry. I don't know what's up with my phone. She's standing by the sink? Sorry. Who is standing by the sink? I looked up to the sink. No one was there, and yet the sound of oil sizzling had been turned by my paranoia into the sound of someone breathing. No one. My fucking autocorrect is acting up. No one. Don't open the oven. Are you fucking with me, dude? It's funny. Are you bringing your shotgun or not? I glared at the oven. Should I check? I didn't really want to. I'll call you after I'm done. I dictated. I'll call you after I'm done. She's almost done. Who the fuck is she? My throat was dry. I turned off the stove and washed my hands, absently wiping them with a towel, while staring at the oven. I grabbed the phone. I still wanted to see if it would pick up something else, so I tried one last time. I don't know. The phone picked up. She wants to come out of the oven now. My heart stopped. My legs searched desperately for the fastest way upstairs, almost tripping, and I basically crawled to my bedroom, where I called Brian and told him what had happened. He figured that I was just freaked out about living alone for so long in the woods, and offered to pick me up and drive me to his place. I reluctantly agreed. When he arrived, I sprinted past the kitchen and got into the car. He thought that the whole thing was funny, but I couldn't bring myself to smile back. While we were talking on the phone, I'd heard the oven ding downstairs. Story 3. There's always a death in my family on November 13th. My name is Dustin, and in my family, the date November 13th has always spelled death. In 1994, it was my grandmother. In 2004, my stepmother. In 2014, my father. Every 10 years, like clockwork, each death darkened the last. And now it's November 12th, 2024. Just a few hours left until midnight. I haven't slept in 3 days. I remember the first death vividly. I was just 10 years old in 1994 when Grandma passed. 5 days before she died, she kept saying someone was standing near the main door, then near her bedroom. We thought it was just her poor eyesight or dementia. She could barely see the food on her plate, after all. But she'd interrupt her own stories, glancing nervously at nothing in particular, whispering, "She's come again." One night, while she was telling me her usual bedtime tale, she stopped mid-sentence, stared at the hallway, and started gasping for breath. I remember panicking, fetching water, calling her name, splashing her face. She finally opened her eyes and whispered in terror, "She's gonna kill me," the woman standing right by the attic stairs. I looked. There was no one. I told her so. She said, "Look again. The glass of water will fall off the dresser." I turned back to look at her. "There's nothing happening, Grandma. The glass is right there." And the moment those words left my mouth, crash. The glass hit the floor and shattered. I screamed and ran. The bedroom door slammed shut behind me. My parents didn't believe me. "You imagined it," they said. "You're just a child." But I knew something terrible was coming. 2 days later, we found her body in the attic room, curled up in the far corner, her eyes and mouth wide open, frozen in fear. I was never the same again. By the time I was 20, life had drained any concept of normal from my soul. I came home from college one evening and rang the doorbell. No one opened the door. I used the spare key. The first thing I noticed was that the attic door, always shut, was slightly ajar. Inside, under the rafters where Grandma had died, sat my stepmother. Her back was rigid and her face turned away. She was rocking slowly, muttering. I called her name. No response. I stepped in closer. Her skin was pale. Her lips quivered. Then she turned and whispered, "Your grandmother told me everything. She won't leave us alone. She'll kill us all." Over and over like a chant. I tried pulling her away, but she felt impossibly heavy, like she had sunk in the floor itself. When I finally got her out of the attic room, the dresser inside rattled, and the glass flew off and shattered, just like before. She pushed me out, slammed the attic door shut, and locked it. I called my father, who rushed home. His face was pale, almost icy. Without a word, he handed me a bundle of white cloth, shroud fabric. Then he walked to the closet, pulled out incense sticks, and murmured on the phone, "Yes, the strongest ones. Lavender base if possible." Then to me, "Stay away from the attic. I'm going to break the door." I will never forget what I saw next. My stepmother, hunched under the slanted ceiling, was chewing on glass. Blood ran down her chin. She smiled at us, but her eyes were weeping. Before we could stop her, she slit her own throat with a glass shard. Blood sprayed across the walls. She bled out within minutes. The date? November 13th, 2004. My father arranged a funeral, forbidding me from going near her body. He tried to keep me safe. But no one could protect you from something like this. By 2014, as the next November approached, I lived in constant dread. Every creak in the house made me flip on all the lights. I avoided mirrors, shut the attic, and barely slept. On the night of November 9th, my father seemed different, quiet. He didn't speak much, didn't eat. On the 10th, he locked himself in his room. By the 11th, he wouldn't even respond when I knocked. I found him talking to himself in the garden, seated under the old oak tree, the attic key in his hand. He said he was speaking to her, the one who haunted us, begging her to spare me, apologizing for the past. That night, he made tea and hummed lullabies. Too calm. On the night of the 12th, I fed him dinner and stayed in his room. When he went to the bathroom, I waited, but he didn't come back. I knocked. No response. I broke the door. Inside, the walls were scratched with one line repeated over and over. It was my fault. My father was gone. I saw the garden window open. Rushing outside, I found him kneeling in the dirt, muttering prayers. Then suddenly he began digging, bare hands tearing into soil. I tried to pull him away, but he shoved me back with a strength I didn't know he had. He lay inside the shallow pit and whispered, "Take care of yourself. She's come for me." Then he grabbed a nearby brick and smashed his own skull. He died before I could scream. That brings us to now. It's November 12th, 2024, nearly midnight. I must have dozed off despite everything. When I woke, I heard voices. The house was full. Relatives. Dozens of them. They were smiling, chatting like it was a celebration, but no sound came from their mouths. I stepped out of my room and into the hallway. No one noticed me, until they all did. Every face turned toward me. Then came through the crowd my grandmother, my stepmother, my father. They walked up to me, their eyes sunken, their expressions blank. Grandmother whispered, "It's your turn now, Dustin. You can't escape." I woke up screaming. It was 9:40 p.m. Then I heard it. The attic door creaked open. The scent of incense, the same night blooming jasmine, which was there for every death, filled the air. A diary lay on the attic floor. Inside it, handwriting I'd never seen before. A confession. The woman I called mother all my life wasn't. She was my father's second wife. My real mother was my father's first wife, and she died shortly after giving birth to me. Poisoned, dehydration induced by a night blooming jasmine, left to suffer, bound in the attic. My grandmother had arranged it. She wanted a daughter-in-law with a dowry, and when my mother became inconvenient, they got rid of her. As I read those last entries, I looked up. A woman stood in the attic corner, not threatening, not angry, just looking at me calmly in peace. Maybe I'll survive tonight, because vengeance has already been served. Story 4. My town changed in a month, and I don't recognize it anymore. I swear I'm not crazy, but I've been watching my town change, and it feels like I've been thrown 100 years into the future. When I was a boy, the streets were dirt, and children played stickball till dusk. You could hear the crack of bats and the laughter of neighbors from one end of Main Street to the other. Farmers sold eggs and apples at the roadside. Horses clopped past, wagons rattled, and the tallest building in town was a library. 3 proud stories with stained glass windows on the top floor. Everyone walked. It was the simplest thing in the world. To the bakery, to church, to the grocer. You could greet half the town just by strolling 2 blocks. But then, all at once, things began to change. The first week, the dirt roads were scraped smooth and covered in black stone. The footpath under the maples, the one we all took to the market, was plowed under. Progress. The mayor called it. The market itself was rebuilt farther away. Nobody minded, except me. When I realized the walk was twice as long. By the second week, the road had doubled, then doubled again. Yesterday, 2 wagons could pass side by side. Today, 6 roaring lanes of machines shot past. Crossing felt like standing before a firing squad. A boy named Samuel didn't make a cross. The drivers only blasted their horns, as if he had no right to be there. The buildings changed next. The library had once had colored glass windows on the 3rd floor. I remember climbing the stairs with my father, but one morning it was only a squat brick box, flat and windowless. Margaret's house lost its 2nd story overnight. People just shrugged, and then some buildings didn't just shrink, they vanished. The post office, the drugstore, the old theater. One evening they were there. By morning, the lots were flat, striped in paint. Nobody even mentioned the loss. Main Street didn't mourn either. The family businesses went under one by one. The tailor, the bakery, The toy shop. I thought there would be grief, but instead people smiled. They said, "It's fine. There's a bigger store 20 minutes away." They said it like it was good news, like it made things easier. Even the shopkeepers, faces pale in their empty storefronts. 4 stiff little smiles and nodded, as if it were all for the best. It was the smiles that unsettled me most. The corner store went differently. I woke one night to see a crowd standing outside it. They didn't shout. They didn't argue. They just pressed their hands to the brick. The walls creaked like something alive under strain. By sunrise, the store was gone. The ground was smooth and black. Mr. Alvarez was gone too. When I asked about him, people turned their faces away. Even the houses began to twist. Where there had once been little walkways leading from front doors to the street, the paths bent sideways overnight. Now they lead only to the driveways. Step out your door and you're steered straight to a car. The houses themselves seem to drift back a little farther each night. 10 feet, 20. In some cases you can barely see them from the street anymore. Voices don't carry that far, and the lawns keep stretching. I remember when Mr. Dawson pushed his mower while whistling, and Mrs. Henson swung her side like her father before her. The yards were small, the work quick. Now they look like fields. Nobody mows on foot anymore. They ride little machines across endless grass that wasn't so big yesterday. From a distance, the riders look like toys circling endlessly. The children are gone too, not gone but hidden. They used to play stickball in the street, chalk lines drawn across the pavement, shouts echoing through the block. Now, whenever an engine sounds, mothers rush out and yank them inside. Doors slam, curtains snap shut. The way the street empties reminds me of an old western, right before a gunfight. Except this happens every day. The strangest moment was when I was walking home one evening. I saw the Dawsons on their porch. When they noticed me coming down the street, they froze. Mrs. Dawson clutched her husband's arm. His face was tight with fear until I came close enough for him to recognize me. "Oh," he said, almost laughing. "It's only you. We thought it was somebody else." They didn't say who, but the way they hurried inside after, shutting the door tight, I knew. Around here, anyone walking is treated like a danger. I tried walking toward the edge of town last week to see if the farms were still there. Mr. Whitaker used to sell apples and eggs from a stand by the road. My kids love his fruit. But when I reached the spot, there were only neat houses and driveways. No barn, no stand, not even a fence post. A man watering his lawn frowned when he saw me lingering. "You're lost," he said flatly. Then he turned, and his garage door closed behind him. And my friends are changing too. James once walked everywhere with his daughter, pointing out the old shops. He was the kindest soul I knew. But the first time I saw him behind the wheel, he nearly struck me in the crosswalk. He didn't wave. He didn't apologize. He leaned on the horn and sped so close I felt the heat of his engine. That wasn't James anymore. By the 4th week, I was the only one left walking. The streets roared with iron and smoke. The trees were gone. The porches were empty. Even the old dirt path to downtown has been erased. Where it once began, a new sign stands. "No trespassing. This means you." I could see downtown just across the grass, close enough to touch. But I couldn't reach it, and now it's at my door. This morning the sidewalk was gone. My steps lead straight into 12 lanes of traffic. If I want to eat, I'll have to try to cross. I don't know if I'll make it back alive. The strangest thing is that everyone else seems happy. If you ever hear construction outside your window, if you ever wake to find the street wider than it was yesterday, don't stay. Run. Story 5. A crew is missing on the Green Creek fire. 18 days have passed since we departed from our home station. Me, Tyler, Isaac, our operator Vaughn, and our Captain James all loaded up into our Type 3 fire engine and made our way for our assignment to Central Washington. The Green Creek fire had grown from 1,000 acres with low spread potential to over 30,000 acres in just a matter of days. Our first week consisted of vigorous mop-up, digging, cutting, and drowning any residual heat out of the wasteland the flames had left behind. Certainly not the most glamorous work, but we were used to it. This was my second year in fire, and the beautiful landscape of trees, mountains, and streams at Washington had to offer a sure beat the desert scenery that we were used to back home. On day 8, we were informed during briefing that a hand crew of 18 people were missing. They were working on one of the most active flanks of the fire and had not been seen since the previous day. Overnight, various attempts to contact them, and other crews forming search parties had no luck in locating the crew. The pickup trucks as they arrived and were parked in a safe area, a short hike away from where that began work that day. Fatalities sometimes happen, and we often study and learn from incidents in which individuals or crews are lost on fires. I've been on fires where people got injured, but nothing like this. Some of the crew's gear had been found burned over in the area. They were working, but no bodies, which gave everyone hope that they may just be lost. Needless to say, we had been told to keep an eye out, and hopefully they would turn up. It was on day 9 that we were told by our division leader that we would be reassigned to help hold a burning operation on the most active flank of the fire. This usually meant standing on a road, while a hand crew takes drip torches in a line to burn off everything on the side that is threatening to burn past the road. Meanwhile, as an engine crew, we make sure that if anything catches on the opposite side, we can put out quickly and ensure that the burn won't get out of hand. The burn began around 1930, and the familiar burn of smoke in my throat was a generous way to take me out of my sleep-deprived state. I stayed with the hose for about an hour, watching into the green on my left for embers that might escape into the brush. The occasional tree would ignite, causing a surge of adrenaline to fuel my body and give me an excuse to enjoy spraying the hose. After giving Isaac and Tyler some time on the nozzle, and the 3 of us taking turns assisting with the burn, it had become dark out. The development of the missing crew left a haze over everyone, and every radio transmission of the search parties was listened to intently in hopes that they might bring good news. Things were wrapping up for the night around 0000, and we had progressed almost 2 miles. As the burn was coming to an end, I stood nozzle in hand, looking out into the dark forest on my left, only barely illuminated by the flames on my right. I became transfixed on a pair of antlers peeking out from a brush. They moved only slightly, bobbing up and down. They were too far away to see clearly, and the flames cast light on them in an inconsistent way that made them even more difficult to focus on. I thought to grab the attention of Vaughn from the driver's seat, but his focus was on the burn to the right. As I looked back toward the antlers, they had come closer. The bizarre fact was I couldn't see the head they were attached to. The brush was tall, but a buck should have stood taller. This bothered me because it was as if somehow the animal was sneaking through bushes, as if it were a predator, not to mention deer cannot move in that way. I became more unnerved the closer they came. From where I first spotted them in the darkness, they left room for my eyes to deceive me, but the closer they came I began to see more clearly. Instead of the plump, tall figure of a deer, I could only see the antlers barely protruding from above the bushes, slowly swaying left and right in a hypnotic dance. I was transfixed, and as they weaved in between the brush and the tree trunks, fear shot throughout my body like I had never felt it before. From around 50 yards away, I saw a slender human-like hand reach out and grasp onto a tree limb, followed by a humanoid body slightly visible now above the brush. For one moment I could see it entirely. Its arms and legs too long for a normal human's, and its grotesque naked body stood abnormally tall, and at its head was a buck's skull worn as if it were a mask. In an instant it was gone, and from deep within the trees I heard it scream like a man's voice mixed with an animalistic tone of despair and grief that I could never forget. I didn't sleep until 2 days later, when the exhaustion of working 16 hours a day caught up to me. I was quiet for the rest of the assignment and incredibly sleep deprived. I didn't tell anyone what I saw, and I knew that nobody would believe me if I did. I tried to rationalize and shrug it off as my mind playing tricks on me in the dark. After days of endlessly thinking about what I had experienced, our assignment was over and we were heading home. During our drive on the second day, James found a news article that revealed the crew had been found, all dead. The official report stated that they had been killed by wildlife according to their injuries, and were found 2 miles away from where they had been. Everyone tried to make sense of how 18 people could have died the way they did, and what kind of animal could have done that. I've never heard of anything capable of doing that, but I believe I may have seen what was responsible that night. Story 6. My son can't stop humming the same tune, and it's starting to freak me out. It all started last Monday. I received a call from his basketball coach. My son, Riley, had been acting more strangely than usual. He said my son had seemed to intentionally pop 2 basketballs alone in the locker room. I made my son play for the church league after school. Even though I know he would much rather play on a computer or phone, it wasn't like him to get in trouble. When I got to the school gym, the coach told me the basketballs were old and worn, but Riley refused to explain how they popped. I went to talk to my son, and it didn't seem to register right away that I was talking to him. He was glued to his phone screen, rocking back and forth, humming to himself. The 3rd time I yelled his name, he finally looked up at me and smiled. I asked him how he popped the basketballs. He shrugged, and I heard him hum that creepy tune for the first time. I told him to get up. Maybe he was hiding something sharp. At this point, although I was a little weirded out, I grew up with 2 older brothers and knew how much boys like to poke and prod things and blow them up. I told Riley's coach that we would pay for the 2 balls, and it would come out of Riley's own piggy bank. When I scolded him to apologize, Riley let out the longest sorry I've ever heard him say, with a sly smile. When we got home, I told him to march up to his room and pull out the $50 I figured the 2 balls would be to replace. He nodded, and as he climbed up the stairs, I heard him humming that same creepy tune. When he got back down the stairs, I asked him what he was humming. He looked at me with genuine confusion. He told me he hadn't been humming anything. I still regret not pushing for an answer then, but I rolled my eyes and let him stomp back upstairs. Riley spent the rest of that night in his room. I honestly forget what I was watching down in the living room, but when I finally called a night at 11 o'clock, I remember knocking on Riley's door, telling him it's time for bed. Although I can't be certain, looking back at everything that's happened, I swear I could hear that same creepy, childlike tune. The tune reminded me of some of those tunes from SpongeBob when I was a kid. Like, remember that episode with the sea bear? When SpongeBob is describing what not to do to Squidward, the background tune is what Riley has been humming. I just looked it up. It's called House of Horror from SpongeBob, but Riley's tune was not quite that. Riley's was more high-pitched, more drawn-out, unsettling, and it seemed to just get worse as the week went on. I don't remember ever seeing Riley watch any of the old SpongeBob seasons, but it's always possible he watched them at his dad's house on the weekends. Tuesday was a late day for me at work. Linda, one of Riley's friends, Will's mom, picked him up every Tuesday, so Riley and Will could hang out for 2 hours while I rushed back to our neighborhood after work. When I got to Linda's house, Linda pulled me aside to the living room. She told me Riley had spent the entire time in the bathroom. After an hour, Will had come to grab her because he was getting mad that Riley wouldn't come out. I brought my tone to a whisper, wondering if maybe Riley might have had an accident and didn't want to see it. Linda seemed to nod in agreement, but told me that Will had said that Riley was watching it on his phone and wouldn't share. I felt the color drain from my face. Again, Riley was 12 years old, but the idea of him doing that in someone else's house was appalling. I began to apologize, but Linda called Will over, who was watching something on his phone, on the living room couch. Linda asked Will about it. It's nothing, just, Will paused. Is it? I cleared my throat out of sheer embarrassment. Linda stared me down like I was about to cross some unspoken boundary. She grabbed at my arm, a silent but clear command to stop. Wiley, honey, is it A? Linda's voice dropped to a whisper. Naughty video? Will crinkled his nose. Yeah, no. Gross, Mom. I let out a sigh of relief. What is it then, honey? Linda pushed further. Will seemed to hesitate. He looked back at me and Linda, and took a glance up to the second-story balcony. His mouth fell open as the 3 of us followed Riley's descent from the second story. Will got up and seemed to hide behind his mom, farthest away from Riley. Riley smiled, waved at Will, and walked out the front door. Linda looked at me, puzzled, although I was equally confused. I gave a half-honest smile, apologized, and hustled out of their house. When I got outside, Riley was already sitting in the passenger seat, looking straight ahead. I must have accidentally left the car unlocked. I tried my best to get an answer out of Riley. Each question about it or the bathroom, or even trying to return the basketball incident from yesterday, resulted in a sarcastic chuckle or indifferent snort. When we pulled into the house, my exhaustion at an all-time high, I felt Riley's eyes face me, and for a brief moment, I felt my son's humanity return. "Sorry, Mom," he mumbled before he slowly rocked his head back and forth, humming the tune from yesterday. Riley grabbed his backpack and left me alone in the car. I pondered calling Riley's dad, but I would rather not hear a lecture from Kyle, Riley's dad, who already disapproved of my parenting style. I instead found my older brother Ian's name on my contact list and told him about the two-day events. Ian let me finish my rant before he told me it sounded like Riley was going through a weird moment in his puberty, and it's probably best to just leave him alone. As I started to push back a little bit, I felt my brother's voice get more assertive than usual, telling me it's best to just leave it alone. Ian hung up on me, something completely out of the ordinary for him. I sat in a huff for a minute before resolving to go about my day. I grabbed my work bag and walked into the house. Riley sat on the couch staring down at his phone. When I walked in, he seemed to quickly do something on it. "Were you watching?" I inquired, grabbing for his phone before he could answer. He looked up at me. "Nothing. My phone is dead." His speaking style was too polished, too short. This wasn't my Riley. I snatched his phone from his hands and tried to press the power button. Sure enough, the phone lit up with a no battery signal. I handed Riley his phone back in defeat. He got up and started for the stairs. Sure enough, he started humming again, drawn out, ominous. "Stop." I cried out. "Riley, please stop humming whatever that is. I don't like it." Riley stopped. He slowly turned toward me and seemed to just blink in place. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something and quickly closed it. He did this 3 more times before he took his first confident step backwards. His mouth was now ajar as his eyes still seemed to study me as if I were prey. He took another step back and then another. He watched me, stepping backwards upstairs until he got to the top. He slammed his door shut. I climbed the steps, retreated to my own room, and on the way, waited in front of Riley's door for any out-of-the-ordinary sounds, but heard complete silence instead. I collapsed at the foot of the bed, head in my hands, begging, no praying for an answer to this weirdness. I tried to think of my own family history. I know my grandpa had dementia before he died, but there weren't any clear examples of mental illness in my family. I decided then and there that I would call Kyle, Riley's dad, if his creepy antics kept up the next day. It would be good to warn him too, as he would take Riley for the weekend anyway, that Friday. Wednesday morning school drop-off was a silent affair. "Have a good day, sweetie." I smiled at him, eager for any affirmation, as we pulled up to the entrance. Riley grabbed his backpack from the back seat, took a deep breath, and left me without a word. I watched him march up to the school, his head perfectly straight. His posture would make a drill sergeant blush. That Wednesday afternoon, I saw the school's caller ID pop up on my phone. I tried to center myself, expecting the worst. Hello, I am Mrs. Rhonda. Is this Riley's mother?" Yes, it is." I felt my voice falter. Riley had done something. I could feel it. Is he okay?" Mrs. Rhonda paused. "He's okay. He's here in the office." I cursed under my breath. Riley's antics had already caused me embarrassment with his basketball coach and friend's mom. My mind was racing through the possibilities of suspensions, or even worse. Mrs. Rhonda continued, "Has your son been acting up recently? Could be worse than I imagined. A fight? Destruction of school property?" I swallowed my pride. "Yes, Mrs. Rhonda. He's been acting, differently since Monday." "I see. Well, there was an incident during recess today. Your son and a group of 10, maybe 12 boys took over the girls' bathroom, if you will. What? I had already started corralling my purse and mouthed to my boss, I had to go. As I reached my car, Mrs. Rhonda continued. They seemed to hiss at incoming girls. Your son, Riley, was making a game of washing the boys' feet. What? As I swerved out of the parking lot. Her words, however confusing they were, raced in my mind. Some of the boys, Mrs. Rhonda waited. Some of the boys screamed as he did it. The shudder ran down my spine. My mind went blank. A swerve. Barely avoided the SUV. Are you okay? Mrs. Rhonda inquired. I'm fine, I choked out. I'll be there soon. With that, I hung up. When I got to school, Mrs. Rhonda was wiping away tears. I saw Riley sitting swaying back and forth through the office window, some of his friends sitting motionless around him. I spotted with 2 boys down. As Mrs. Rhonda buzzed me in, I went to apologize, but Mrs. Rhonda interrupted me before I could start. Have you told Riley about my son James before? I looked at Mrs. Rhonda with confusion. Your son? Yes, she said in between sniffles, her voice dropping to a breathless whisper. The one who dashed. She held back a flood of tears. The one who died. I instinctively pulled back in shock. Riley asked me. Mrs. Rhonda blew her nose, pushing away a tear. Riley asked me if we still had the blue Subaru that James was driving. I felt my breath stop and start. The lights seemed to get brighter and dimmer all at once. I felt my chest start to hurt, and it became increasingly impossible to gather a breath. James was driving the blue Subaru when he went off the road 10 years ago. Mrs. Rhonda examined me closely, seemingly trying to sniff out some knowledge of the incident I hadn't revealed. Riley told me that James would want us to drive it still. The little bits of James would remind us of him. The room began to spin. I looked over at the bench that held Riley. He looked over at me and grinned, still rocking back and forth. I didn't recognize my child for the first time in my life. I tried my best to apologize to Mrs. Rhonda before I went to grab Riley. As we left, I leaned in and whispered to Mrs. Rhonda that Riley would be out the rest of the week. When we got to the car, I told Riley to sit in the back seat. I couldn't be near him at the moment. As we drove, I kept catching Riley staring me down the rearview window, smiling and sniggering to himself. As we came up to a stoplight near our house, and he could see me staring back at him, Riley opened up his mouth, unnaturally long, and his humming emanated from the black hole of his mouth. When we got back to the house, Riley threw his bag down on the floor and locked himself in the downstairs bathroom before I could stop him. I heard him turn on the water, but I didn't hear him turn it off. I could hear him humming his tune, even over the water. No matter where I was in the house, it seemed to be just a few feet away. I retreated to the front lawn, climbing back into the car and pressing my ex-husband's contact on my phone. When he finally picked up on the 4th ring, I was hopeless in stopping the stream of tears. Kyle seemed annoyed as I began to recount the basketball story, giving snide remarks or downplaying the terror of it all. As I went deeper, Kyle fell silent. I just don't know what's happening to him, I said between sobs. I'm scared. I'm scared for him. I could barely compute this feeling at the time, but it's only become more real the longer this terror has dragged on. I'm scared of him. I waited for his response. 10 seconds melted into 30 seconds when Kyle finally said something. This all had a valid explanation. It's Go Dash. What are you talking about? My words poured out before I could stop them. Did you tell him about Mrs. Rhonda and James? I didn't even know about that. Kyle paused again. I must have. Kyle tried to reassure me. Might have come up when I talked to him about drunk driving. I felt my breath begin to quicken again. It's fucked up to bring up, but boys like to bring up the taboo. Kyle continued. You really think it is not some adult videos? I considered his theory. Will, Riley's friend told me and his mom it wasn't. I reiterated. Of course. The little fucker would say it wasn't porn. Kyle sarcastically snorted. Look, he probably just found some article on that James kid and wanted to freak people out. But the humming, Kyle, the feet thing, it's not natural. Something's really wrong with him. Maybe my words stumbled over one another. Voice dropped an octave as I hesitated at my next thought. Maybe we look into therapy options or an exorcism. I whispered. Kyle took a long breath. He's not going to goddamn therapy. And you're joking about that religious crap. Look, I'm stuck here in Yuma for another day, but first thing Friday morning, I'll come grab him. Might just need a change of scenery. And if he's not right when I drop him off Sunday, we can look into other options. I nodded to myself. Okay, I'm going to watch him tomorrow. Kyle, maybe he'll be okay just around me. We ended our call. My hand found the door handle, but my trembling fingers refused to push it further. After a few minutes of silence, I finally exited my car and tiptoed up to the front door. As I reached for my keys, the front door slowly swung open, and I could hear the slight hum from inside the house. Riley, I called out, taking a tender step forward into the house. I looked up the stairs, expecting to see his figure loitering over me, but found the space empty. I heard his devilish humming again. It surrounded me. Still, I couldn't place the source. Riley, I yelled out, circling the first level. Riley, come out now, I'm not playing. My voice fluttered in the air. My head felt fuzzy. My sinuses pushed against my eyes, while I could hear the blood rushing in my arms. The humming got louder as I neared the living room. Riley, you're starting to scare me. I cried out of desperation. My voice, a shadow of its past self, died within the confines of the living room. Not daring to venture further, I collapsed in despair onto the couch. I felt a tear begin to well up in my right eye. I tried to push it away with my left pointer finger. Chalky, white smear just below my eye, a fingertip taste. Solved. I ever so slightly made out the sounds of snickering to the left of the couch. I hesitated for a half second before I slid my body to the side of the kitchen and peeked down. Riley was on his knees, seeming to laugh to himself, guarding his mouth with his hand. He looked up at me, his eyes seeming to stare right through me. He returned his gaze to the floor and restarted his snickering. The snickering was unnatural, forced, devoid of joy. My hand reached out and grabbed his back. Riley immediately went quiet. He looked over at my hand, and I felt his eyes follow my arm up to my torso, before staring back at me with so much disdain you would have thought I had just spit on him. Riley, I mumbled out. His face went neutral. He blinked twice before slowly rotating his head back until his skull found the back of his neck. I looked up at the ceiling, desperate to see something, anything to explain what was going on with my son. My whole body jolted when that same demonic humming radiated out from Riley. My hands found the sides of my head, right hand migrating south to clasp the rosary I had started to keep in my pocket. It was gone, misplaced, or worse. I mustered the last of my strength. Riley, go to your room. I shouted out, desperately trying to reclaim control of the house. Riley rose to his feet and looked down at me. I felt my lip tremble as I rose to my feet. Riley and I were the same height, but in that moment, I felt like a mouse. Riley's face slowly contorted into a smile. I could hear his lips cracking and his face twitching into place. He walked towards the staircase and silently started climbing to the top. I followed closely behind. Halfway up the steps, Riley stopped before breaking into a dead sprint for the last 6 steps, throwing open his door. I was startled, but tried my best to follow close behind. When I got his open door, Riley was perched in a perfect 90-degree angle staring straight ahead. His gaze was locked on his closed closet door as he began to hum his creepy tune again. My body felt limp, like my energy had been sucked out. I took a timid step back from his door, his humming still ringing in my ears. Something was calling out to me, but I still don't understand. I had to be near his bedroom, near my son, near the humming. I plopped down on the floor next OT his door frame. It was only 6. The hallway still basked in light from outside. By 9, the sun had faded, and it was dark. My only companion was a non-stop humming. The sun soon emerged. I looked down at my phone. The time had already bled into 9 a.m. on Thursday when I tucked my head back into Riley's room. He sat completely rigid, eyes still trained directly in front of him, humming that same wicked tune. The early morning soon ate into the afternoon. I sat motionless, transfixed on Riley's humming, waiting for a hint of normality, a twinge of difference, just a taste of humanity. My son was now missing. Nothing, just a humming, an elixir of evil and turmoil. The daylight soon slid into darkness, and my hum-induced trance was broken by a sudden thud at the front door. My legs trembled and felt weak as I got off the floor. The hallway around me covered in a slight haze. I had to blink away. I took cautious steps down the stairs, opening up the front door to see Kyle standing before me, wearing a yellow vest. "I've been calling all day. Are you okay?" Kyle asked, his voice a mix of anger and genuine concern. I looked down at my phone, realizing now that I had somehow missed 16 phone calls from Kyle. Kyle seemed to study me more thoroughly. I felt his eyes glaze over the eye bag that must have been present, and him trying desperately to find life in the husk of a former wife who stood before him. I should have called for a wellness check. "What's wrong?" I nodded my head back and forth. The sunlight burned my eyes. "Riley." My mind went blank. What about him? Is he still acting funny? Kyle asked, placing his hand on the door frame, before flashing a smile behind me. "Ah, Riley." I turned to look back to see Riley with his head down. Riley pushed against me, holding his usual weekend bag. "Riley, everything okay?" Kyle asked. Riley stopped in front of his dad. His eyes started at his feet before slowly trickling up to his torso, then his head. Riley stood there motionless, just staring at his father. Kyle looked at me with shock at first, then quickly shifted into something dripping with terror. Riley then started a low hum before he kept walking toward the truck and climbed into Kyle's Ford F-150. "What's wrong with him?" Kyle asked with gritted teeth. His face was ghostly white. I looked at him with sincerity. I felt my hand try to find his shoulder, but missed badly, nearly falling forward until Kyle caught me. "Are you okay?" Kyle's concern was no longer shrouded in his usual nihilist disdain towards me. For the first time since our divorce, I felt like Kyle truly cared about me. I felt the words, "No, I'm not fine. Something is wrong with me," trying to bubble up my throat, but my eyes found Riley in the truck passenger seat, and my head slowly shook yes. Kyle placed me back on my feet. "If things get more fucking weird, I'll let you know." I could see his arms trembling. He looked over his shoulder at Riley in his truck. "Honey, I will call you if things get worse." "Riley." "Riley's not okay. We'll call the therapist, the police, whatever. Are you sure you're okay?" As if I were a marionette puppet, I felt my head slowly nod yes. His truck pulled out of the driveway. Riley's eyes followed me as the two disappeared from view. All at once, I felt my legs start to buckle. The world started spinning as I inched my way back into the house. I took a few feeble steps towards the stairs when everything went black. I had passed out on Friday morning. My senses returned to me on Saturday afternoon. The last 2 days of no sleep had come crashing down all at once, putting me in an impossible 24-hour coma. As I peeled myself off the wooden floor, left cheek wet with my own saliva, it took only half a second to remember I hadn't eaten or drunk in 3 days. I sprinted to the kitchen, bouncing off a living room wall on the way, and almost went headfirst into the refrigerator. After throwing leftover chicken into the microwave and drinking approximately a gallon's worth of sink water, I tried to plan out my next move. My son was unwell. That was clear, and any further denial would do him or me no good. I reached for my phone. What was the only boy I recognized in the office with Riley that day? Had he looked okay? Honestly, I was so transfixed on Riley and what Mrs. Rhonda told me, I hadn't noticed. I dialed for Linda, Will's mom. It rang twice before abruptly hanging up. I dialed for her again. The same unfortunate result. I started to pace, my fingernails finding the inside of my teeth. A third time. No answer. I hit the message icon instead. "Linda, are you and Will okay?" Green text. I looked down in confusion. I dialed her again, immediate voicemail. "Linda, please pick up. I'm worried about you and Will." My mind was soon racing with theories. Will, had he done something to Linda? Does that mean that Riley would do something to... I dialed Kyle immediately. "Come on, Come on. Pick up Kyle. Pick up Kyle. I muttered to myself. Nothing. Again. Nothing. I clicked the message button, hoping for a better result than Linda. The 3 dots notifying me that Kyle was typing appeared on the left side of my screen. I let my finger hover over the keyboard, anxiously awaiting Kyle's response. The dots lingered, lost in mid-sentence before disappearing. Never mind, I started my message. Kyle, are you and Riley okay? I've been out for a day. I'm SCA-. My phone buzzed to life. Linda was calling. I gathered my breath before hitting answer. Hello? Ah! 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 I yanked the phone away from my ear. The blood-curdling scream erupted from the phone speaker. Linda! I screamed into the phone, already dissolving into a broken mound of tears, terror, and confusion. Linda, are you okay? Oh, dash. She was cut off mid-scream. Linda? I was wrestling with my composure. I let the phone fall from my ear. The same humming Riley has been repeating all week echoed out of the phone. Thus wasn't real. It can't be. The humming grew louder and louder. End call. The call was gone, but the humming still surrounded me. I found Kyle's name again in my phone and ran to the front door. Kyle lived about 20 minutes away. I called the police on the way, and we would solve this now. I grabbed my keys, and I stumbled out the door when I saw it. A phone was buzzing on the front mat with my name on the screen. My trembling hand reached down to grab the phone. The gleaming picture of an 8-year-old Riley and Kyle at a baseball game confirmed the worst. The phone was Kyle's. The humming grew louder. I twisted around and ran up the stairs, reaching my bedroom and locking the door behind me. That's where I am now. I've tried call 911 6 times, but each time all it responds with is that same damn creepy humming. Does anyone know what I can do? I don't have a weapon, and the humming seems to be right up against the door now. I can make out a little mouth in the door gap by the floor, a gap torturing me with that same spine-chilling humming. The tongue that comes out of it. It's long, too long for a human. I think it's Riley, and I don't think he's here to comfort his mother. Story 7. Every night, a strange flight of stairs appears in my room. I need to find out where they lead before it's too late. It all started just after I moved back to my old house. I had been going through a messy divorce, and unfortunately, the whole painful process had forced me to go back to the only other home I knew and the only other place I could afford. I moved back into my parents' old house, though they no longer lived there. The place had been rented out since they had moved away. Ultimately, they did not have the heart to sell it. I suppose it had worked out. Since I was being forced to come home, they were able to set me up there with almost no rent and a general agreement to look after the old place. Though I was grateful for a chance to start over, the move back heralded the strange events that followed, and were the catalyst of why I am stuck where I am now. It was the first evening back in the house after nearly 10 years. I had wished my parents were there, but I contented myself just exploring and reminiscing as I wandered the halls and brought the few possessions I still owned inside. It was surreal being back, especially living there all by myself now. I finally managed to get all my boxes inside, and I let out an exhausted sigh and closed the front door. I was tired from moving, and knew I had an early morning with a longer commute to work the next day. I decided to turn in early and went to my old room, which I had put all my bedding in. It was smaller than my parents' room, but the familiarity compelled me to stay in there for the night, even if I might end up moving to a larger room later. I threw myself on the small mattress that I had brought and was fast asleep as soon as my head hit the pillow. I had a few dreams of my childhood in the short time I slept, but my brief rest was not meant to last. In a few short hours, sometime just after dark, I woke up. At least I think I woke up. The entire experience left a heavy fog in my mind, one that still felt very much like a dream. The sensation was strong enough to compel me to get up. I decided I would get a glass of water and try and go back to sleep. When I stood up, I saw that the door to the bedroom was ajar. I thought I had closed it, but I figured I must have forgotten. I walked up to the door and threw it open. I was stunned by what I saw. The hallway was gone. In its place was a spiral staircase. I rubbed my eyes to make sure I was seeing what I was seeing. This had to be a lucid dream, but it all felt too real. The stairs I was looking at were heavy stone, not unlike the tower of a castle or cathedral. There was a drowning echo ringing out in the cavernous stairwell that unsettled me. I leaned in to get a better look around, and I felt the rush of air flowing through like a tunnel. The stairs were a spiral that went both up and down, even though I was already on the top floor of the house. I had no cause to question dream logic, so I decided to enter the stairwell and go down. I thought maybe I would still find a kitchen in my sleep and be able to get a drink before going back to bed. I stepped onto the stairs, and my feet were chilled by the cold surface of the stone steps. They felt real, and I hesitated for a moment. I began walking downstairs, slowly at first. The spiraling stairs gave me a sense of vertigo, despite not being too steep. I brushed it off and continued, moving on for a few minutes. The scenery had not changed. The stairs spiraled ever downward, but there was no door, no exit, just more steps. I had been walking for so long that I knew I would have passed the first floor minutes ago. My descent slowed, and I realized I was getting nowhere. At least I did not think I was. I decided to turn around and go back to my room. Maybe once I got there, I would wake up from this bizarre dream. I turned around and started back up the stairs. When I looked up, I saw the spiraling steps looming down at me like a skyscraper. I could not even perceive the top. I kept walking for a similar stretch of time to my original descent. I started to grow concerned when I passed several levels with no door or aperture to exit. I knew I should have passed the door I had entered by that point. I started to move faster, my feet thrumming dully off the stone steps as I raced up and up. I started feeling the walls for hidden handles or levers. I needed something, anything, to get out of this stairwell, which began to feel more claustrophobic by the moment. After running up the stairs for what felt like ages, I felt exhausted. My heart was hammering in my chest, but I saw something that finally gave me pause. It looked like writing on the wall. It was a faint outline of what may have been chalk. I stepped closer and squinted in the gloom to see the writing on the surface of the wall. It read, "If you see this, turn around. Grabbers are ahead. 1 step forward, 2 steps back. The grabbers will get you if they attack. I will help you if you help me. So up then down, down and away you'll be. Stay safe, Sherry." I was confused by the message. Who was Sherry? And what was a grabber? I considered the odd writing and was about to blow it off when I heard something. There was a soft, dragging sound, echoing down from the stairs above. I paused to listen and heard pronounced shuffling noise, followed by the movement of some lumbering form upstairs. As I stood there, listening in rising tension, I also smelled a fetid odor and felt a chill current of air billowing down the narrow stairwell. I suddenly felt very vulnerable, and the disturbing, dragging sound from upstairs grew louder and more insistent. I decided I needed to get away from that sound, and whatever was making it as fast as possible. I turned back and started rushing down the stairs again. In my haste, I nearly slipped, and when I caught myself on the wall, the sound of my palms slapping against the cold stone echoed all around and above me as well. Suddenly, there was a feral cry from above me, and the slow, dragging sound gave way to loud, ringing footsteps sprinting along the stairs. I started to panic and kept running down the stairs. The sound behind me grew louder and louder. I could not seem to gain any ground on whoever or whatever was making that sound. Whatever its nature, it moved with terrifying speed, and I did not think I could outrun it. Then I began to hear the low, rumbling tone of labored breathing echoing down the stairwell. I had to get out of there. Whatever was chasing me was gaining fast, and would catch me at the rate I was going. I was considering something as I fled. I thought of the strange writing, and realized I might have one chance to try something. The writing had mentioned steps up and down. I turned back toward the encroaching sound above me, and against my better judgment, I took a step up the stairs. Then, without turning around, I walked backwards, down 2 steps. I heard an odd shifting sound, and as if acting on some unknown instinct, I reached my hand to the right without looking and grasped the door handle. I barely had a moment to register my success when I heard the thunderous sound of rampaging footsteps bearing down on me. I took one glimpse into the shadows above me and saw the outlines of large figures rushing down towards me. I snapped out of my terrified daze until the door opened and fell through, kicking the door closed as I dropped. I landed back in my room and painfully sat up, huffing and puffing. I had no idea what the hell happened, but I was grateful to be back in my room. I walked over to my nightstand and grabbed my phone. I saw it was 2 in the morning, and I turned on the flashlight. I inched closer to the door and listened carefully. I did not hear anything. No ominous clamor or the thundering pursuit of hidden hunters, just silence. I tried to quell the paranoid feeling in my mind as I nervously grasped the handle and slowly opened the door. I peeked through the narrow opening I had left and saw the hall of my house. No stairwell, no stone steps, no shrouded figures, just a hall. I let out the breath I had been holding on to and relaxed. I decided against going downstairs for water. I did not want to see any more stairs just then. Instead, I resolved to just go back to bed. I had no idea what I had taken that day that would give me such vivid and unsettling dreams. If I knew, I would try and avoid it in the future. I shambled back to sleep and saw something odd. It was near where I had unceremoniously thrown my mattress earlier that day. There were markings on the wall, just faded enough that I had not noticed them earlier. I looked closer and saw another message drawn in chalk. I was starting to get concerned. I knew I was awake, but this looked like the message I had seen on those impossible stairs. It read, "If you are seeing this, I couldn't find my way back. I rented the place for a while, but I found the steps. I need to see where they lead. I don't know if this is a dream or reality, but in case it's real and I don't come back, send help. Sherry." It was the same person who signed a message on the stairs. Same name, same chalk. How had they left a note in my room and in my house? They said they had stayed here and gotten lost on the stairs. With dawning horror, I considered the implications of the writing and how it was there in my room while I was awake. I began to realize that everything I had experienced that night was real. The endless stairs, the shadow figure stalking the spiraling steps, as well as someone named Sherry, trapped in that labyrinthine staircase with whatever those grabber things were. I had no idea what to do next, but I knew I had to do something. I had taken my first step into a madness-inducing spiral, and wherever it led, or who it led to, would have to wait for another night. Story 8. I found evidence of something rather distressing in my home. So, to really understand the situation, I think you need to understand the mental state one enters when you're falling asleep. You know how you're still aware enough to perceive things that happen around you, but not really enough to react to them or think about the more than half-baked thoughts that don't make a lot of sense. That's the state I was in when most of this started happening. So, I live with my wife and daughter. She lives downstairs, and we both sleep in a room upstairs. Our room is the first after the stairs. In the years that we've lived here, I've come to recognize the sound of my wife and daughter coming up the stairs individually. Naturally, they sound different. The strange thing is, at some point I feel like I started to hear a different set of feet come up the stairs. My wife sleeps in the same bed as me, so it couldn't be her, and my daughter doesn't really have trouble sleeping, or anything that I'm aware of, so I don't think it's her. It's kind of hard to communicate over text how much of a non-issue this seemed to be. See, it happened when I was in that falling asleep state I mentioned earlier. I'd hear it, but I wasn't completely awake, so I wouldn't really think about it. I would hear it. Then I would have some vague thought along the lines of, who was that? Followed by falling asleep. However, if I knew what I found out recently, I'd probably wake up as soon as I heard it. This went on for I think a couple days. My memories of the incidents were pretty hazy and dreamlike. I'm pretty sure after those first couple nights, I mostly dismissed it as a dream. I didn't really think about it during the day. Maybe a couple fleeting thoughts at work or at home before my mind went somewhere else. Now that I've really been able to think about it, I really feel like I was dismissing something I really should have taken more seriously. But again, I can't stress enough the time of night it happened hinder my ability to really think about it much. After about a week, one of my co-workers offhandedly brought up some dream they had, and it reminded me of what was going on at night. And that was the first time I started to really consider what was actually happening. The fact that at that point I'd been going on so long and consistently by then also probably started to tip me off that it was more than just a weird dream. I laid out the situation in my head. Around the same time every night, I hear somebody come up the stairs when I seriously doubt it could be anybody in the house. I wasn't worried exactly, more just curious. I thought about it off and on for the rest of the day at work. When I got home, my wife and daughter were already there. I asked both if they'd gotten up and done anything last night, and neither said they did. I considered the possibilities, and none of them really worried me. I seriously doubted there was an intruder somehow breaking into the house with no other evidence who was doing nothing besides go up the stairs in the middle of the night. This made me a lot less worried than I probably should have been. But yet, I thought about what to do for the rest of the day. I briefly, jokingly thought about that guy in the Bible that put flour or whatever down to catch somebody's footprints, then had a similar thought about installing a tripwire. I came to the conclusion, if it was really happening, I could just record it. I have an old phone that still works. I don't use anymore that still works, but I don't use because it doesn't connect to modern cell towers or something. So I figured I'd just open the audio recording app and let it run overnight. I didn't want to use my current phone since I use it as an alarm clock, and I didn't want to forget it or anything. This actually ended up giving me some really important insight. I woke up and had completely forgotten about the whole thing. I remembered I had the recorder running on my way to work, but realized I'd be late if I went back for it. I briefly wondered how long that thing could run. I didn't think it could use enough memory to crash the phone or something, but it was still weird to think about. When I got home after greeting my family, the first thing I did was go upstairs and listen to the recording. It had, in fact, recorded all night and the entire time I was at work. I skipped between long periods of silence looking for the sound from last night, and I did in fact find the sound of somebody walking up the stairs late at night. Nothing else. No sounds of whoever was going through anything or doing anything that made much of a noise. See, this is where the fact that I use my old phone becomes important. Since it wasn't my current phone, I forgot it and left it running like I'd mentioned. It was recording right until the moment I went upstairs to get it. In skipping around the recording, I accidentally let it play for a few seconds that it captured before I got it. Everybody in the house has a slightly distinct sound when they come up the stairs. I'm sure you've noticed the same thing if you've been around the same people moving through the same part of a building repeatedly. This, of course, included me. I've just never heard it because I was obviously in the stairway whenever I made that noise. This recording was just the first time I'd ever heard it, despite my wife and daughter hearing it countless times. All something I'm not sure I'd ever really thought about before. And this is the part that makes me really concerned, and realize I should have been worried about whatever's going on enough to set up a camera or something instead of just record it like a minor oddity. The sound of me coming up the stairs to get the phone was identical to the sound I'd been hearing in the night. Story 9. I thought I was just watching a random live stream. Now I'm the one being streamed. I don't even know how I found it. One moment I was half asleep, scrolling through random Twitch categories I'd never explored before. Lots of dead channels with broken keyboard names. No thumbnails, 0 viewers. Then I clicked on one. No title, no overlays, just a grainy phone camera pointed at someone's chest. The angle swayed as the person walked. At the bottom, 6 viewers. It shouldn't have caught me. It should have been just another IRL stream, boring and forgettable. But then I recognized the background. The streamer was walking down Main Street. My Main Street. The Dollar Tree with its flickering green sign. The mural on the side of the old laundromat. The leaning streetlight that always looks like it's seconds from collapsing. The camera didn't linger, but it was enough. At first, I thought, no way. There are a million main streets. But then the stream turned left, and there it was, the boarded-up Art Deco theater, the one we've been begging to restore for years. There's only one of those. I froze. person was here. The chat was dead, except for a single message. Grave wax. Watching. I typed into chat. Where is this? No response. The camera shifted slightly, catching the reflection of a stop sign. They crossed an intersection and kept going. I knew the exact angle. It was a 10-minute walk from my apartment. The stream ended abruptly when they reached a stretch of dark road. No goodbye, no fade out, just black. The next night, I checked again. Same account, no profile picture, no VODs. Just live. This time, 9 viewers. I clicked. They were walking again. Closer this time. I recognized the hardware store where I buy light bulbs. The little pizza place with the hand-painted sign. The phone camera tilted high enough to catch the second-floor apartments. I swear I saw a curtain shift. The chat flickered once. Grave wax. Closer. I typed, who are you? Nothing. When the camera passed a 24-hour laundromat on Oak, something twisted in my gut. That laundromat is only 4 blocks from my building. The stream cut out again. The third night, I didn't want to look. I told myself I wouldn't, but I did. 11 viewers. They were walking past a liquor store on the corner of my street. My street. I slammed my laptop shut, heart pounding. I paced my apartment, checked the deadbolt 3 times, shoved a chair under the knob. My phone buzzed. A notification. It was Twitch. Grave Wax mentioned you in chat, but I hadn't been watching. I opened it anyway. The app glitched, pixelated, then snapped clear. The streamer wasn't walking anymore. They were standing still. The camera was pointed down at a cracked patch of pavement. I knew exactly where that was. Right outside my building. I deleted my account, pulled every curtain closed, twisted every lock. I stayed up till morning, clutching a kitchen knife like an idiot. Nothing happened. No knock. No footsteps. No sound at all. When I finally worked up the nerve to check Twitch the next night, the account was gone. I typed the username into the search bar. No results. Like it had never existed. I thought that was the end. I prayed it was the end. 3 weeks passed. Life tried to crawl back to normal. But every night, around 11 p.m., the urge hit the pull to check to make sure. Sometimes I'd sit at my desk, cursor hovering over the Twitch search bar, fighting myself not to type it in. Then, last night, I got a direct message. Not on Twitch. On Discord, the account was blank. No profile picture. No shared servers. Just one message. The stream starts again tonight. You want to watch? I should have blocked it. I should have ignored it. Instead, at 11:03 p.m., I opened Twitch. No channel name, no category, just a broken link thumbnail. Live, 13 viewers. My hand shook as I clicked. The streamer was inside a building, inside my building. I recognized the wallpaper, the same ugly floor print on the stairwell walls. They climbed slowly, each step groaning under their weight. I wanted to scream, to call someone, but my voice felt stuck in my throat. The number in the corner ticked up. 14 viewers. They reached the second floor landing. Stopped, turned, stared at my door. The camera zoomed in on the numbers. 2B, my apartment. I closed the stream. Dialed 911 with trembling fingers. The dispatcher kept me on the line, promised they were sending someone. I stood in the kitchen, knife in hand, staring at the front door like it might explode. 5 minutes. 10. Nothing. Then knock, knock, knock. 3 slow knocks. I raised a knife. I shouted some garbled threat about the police being on their way. Silence. Then footsteps fading down the hall. When the police arrived, they searched the entire building. No one. They told me it was probably some punk messing with me. I tried to show them the stream, but I couldn't. The channel was gone again, erased, like it had never existed. This morning my phone buzzed. A new Discord message. Same blank account. You stopped watching too soon. There was a video file attached. I didn't want to, but I opened it. It was the stream from last night, but it didn't end at my door. In the video, the camera kept recording after I closed the tab. The streamer stood outside 2B for what felt like forever. Then they crouched, almost kneeling, the phone tilted, showing a pale hand reaching forward, sliding something under my door. I dropped my phone and ran to check. My heart hit the floor when I saw it. Right there on the mat, a USB stick. I'm writing this now with the stick plugged into my laptop. There's only one file on it, called watchme.mp4. It's an hour long, grainy footage of me, sleeping in my bed, tossing, turning, pulling the covers up to my chin. The camera never moves, never blinks, like someone was there, filming the whole night. But here's the part that makes me want to tear my skin off. I live alone. My door was still locked from the inside. When I woke up, I don't know how they got in. And I don't know how, at the end of the video, they filmed me sitting up straight, staring directly at the camera with purple eyes. The stream is live again. 15 viewers. And this time, the streamer isn't walking. They're sitting at my desk, using my laptop, streaming me. Story 10. A Twitch streamer asked me to follow him. I shouldn't have. That damn insomnia. It had been tormenting me for almost half a year. No matter how tired I was, I could barely fall asleep, just tossing and turning, suffering through the entire night, no matter what I tried. Lately, I'd gotten into the habit of watching videos, streams, or movies until, finally, after much struggle, sleep would claim me. I'd especially gotten hooked on Twitch. I had a few regular streamers I liked, ones who played games that interested me. This night started the same way. I spent hours browsing, and by around 3 in the morning, I was still trying to decide what to watch. The insomnia had been especially brutal in recent days. I barely slept 1 or 2 hours a night for over a week. Groggily, I scrolled through Twitch, tried to decide what would get me through another long night. That's when one of the recommended live streams caught my eye, a young guy's channel. He was just sitting in his chair, in front of his computer, doing nothing, just staring at his desk. 0 viewers. I felt sorry for him. He sat there so listlessly, staring into space. I thought I'd be nice and click in to see what he was doing. The moment I joined, his eyes went wide as he glanced at his monitor. "Oh my God, finally someone," he shouted into the microphone. I felt a little good about myself, knowing I'd made him that happy just by checking out his stream. "Please, don't leave." "Wait," he continued nervously. "You have to help me. I need to get out of here." I watched the stream with a frown. What kind of bullshit is this? He's probably going to try to scam me out of money. Still, fine. I typed and asked what he wanted. Oh, thank God. Finally, a real person after all this time. I'm stuck in my room. You have to help me somehow. I just shook my head. The guy was a really good actor. His pleading, hopeful face looked frighteningly genuine. How can I help? I typed curious. Well, I'm not exactly sure. But wait, don't go. I'll think of something in a minute. The guy started rummaging around his room, as if looking for something. I saw a box fly from one end of the room to the other. Still there? I typed. After he'd been digging through his stuff for minutes on end, he rushed back to his computer the moment my message notification pinged. Yes, I'm here. Please, don't go anywhere. I promise. I'll figure out in a minute. Can you tell me what time it is where you are? I looked at him suspiciously. What the hell does he even want? What is this kid streaming? It was like he was deliberately stalling for time. But for what? I couldn't clearly see what he was doing. The camera was too far away. He just kept rummaging through his things, pretending to search for something. I think I'm gonna go. I typed. I didn't want to be rude. Poor guy didn't just have 0 followers. He had no viewers besides me. Wait, please. I promise I'm almost there. 3:39. That's when you first messaged me, right? Yes. It's 3:43 now. I replied. The guy suddenly jumped right up to the camera, his face almost filling the entire screen. Hollow, tired features. Dark, sunken eyes. He looked like he hadn't left that room in days. Please, my only wish is to have 1 follower. Please, you can unfollow me afterward, but just follow me for a single moment. I felt a little unsettled. The kid was seriously weird, almost like he wasn't all there. What the hell is wrong with him? For a while, I just listened to him beg, saying that this was all he wanted, that it was his life's dream and he desperately needed it. Eventually, I gave in. What harm could it do to follow some random guy on Twitch? Worst case, I just unfollow later. As soon as I hit follow, the guy let out a scream. Yes, finally. Fuck, finally, he shouted in triumph. Then he swept everything off his desk. All the junk, his camera, and probably his computer too. I'm sorry, but I'm finally free, he yelled, practically coming apart at the seams. I just stared in shock as he raged around the room. He was so happy he was almost destroying the place. Finally, for fuck's sake. Freedom, he roared. Then, without warning, he slammed his door open and bolted out of the room. That was the last thing I saw. The stream cut off. I just sat there frozen, staring at my monitor. What the hell was that? Was the guy completely insane? I shook my head. I'd be better off just watching some series tonight. I stood up from my chair. Maybe I'd even take a sleeping pill, so I could actually get some rest. Then I opened my own bedroom door, but there was no exit. I froze in place. Behind the door, there was only a wall, as if it had been bricked up. In the wall, there was a single message, scratched deep into the surface, surrounded by gouges where fingernails had dug in. Keep someone here in your place. If you want to get out. Zoxo Creves.